Winter had a cruel way of revealing who mattered and who did not. The snow fell endlessly over the city of Ravenspire, coating its stone streets in white while leaving the people beneath it just as cold. For most, winter meant warmth behind heavy doors and glowing hearths. For Alira, it meant hunger, numb fingers, and another night praying she would wake up alive. She had once been someone's daughter. Once laughed. Once dreamed. But the world had stripped her down piece by piece until she was nothing more than the girl by the alley, the one people stepped around without seeing. Her parents had died when she was young, victims of a sickness that swept through the poorer districts and was quickly forgotten by the powerful. With no money, no name worth remembering, Alira learned early that kindness was treated as weakness. That night, the city was alive with urgency. Torches lined the streets. Soldiers stood at every corner. Whispers passed from mouth to mouth like sparks catching dry wood. The Vampire King was coming. King Alaric of the Night Court, ruler of the ancient bloodlines, executioner of rogue clans, and a name spoken only in fear. Humans said he had not walked among mortals for decades. Vampires said when he did, kingdoms shifted. Alira only knew one thing: wherever power gathered, cruelty followed. She stood outside the grand hall, clutching a thin shawl that did little to stop the cold. The guards barely glanced at her before one of them shoved her aside. "Move. You'll freeze out here, girl. Or starve. Either way, not our concern." Inside, nobles laughed. Music echoed. Warmth spilled through open doors she was never meant to cross. Alira lowered her head and did what she always did, made herself small. But fate had already noticed her. Near the kitchens, chaos erupted as servants rushed to prepare for the king's arrival. One young maid dropped a tray, shattering crystal across the floor. The head steward's face twisted with rage. "Useless," he barked. "Clean this up, now." His eyes landed on Alira. "You, alley rat. If you're going to loiter, make yourself useful." She hesitated. Entering the hall was forbidden. Dangerous. But hunger and fear pushed her forward. She knelt, hands trembling as she gathered shards of glass that cut into her skin. Blood welled, but she didn't cry out. She never did. As she worked, a child's sob drifted from behind the kitchens. A young servant boy, no older than 10, shaking in terror at the noise and shouting. Instinctively, Alira leaned toward him. "It's all right," she whispered softly. "Breathe with me." Without thinking, she began to hum. It was a simple melody, old, gentle, carried from a life she barely remembered. The sound was quiet, almost lost beneath the noise of the hall. But somewhere beyond the doors, everything stopped. The moment the Vampire King stepped inside the grand hall, the air itself seemed to bend. Conversations died. Knees weakened. Even the most powerful nobles felt suddenly small. Alaric's crimson eyes swept the room, uninterested, ancient, empty. Until he heard her. The hum cut through centuries of silence like a blade of light. His steps slowed, then stopped. For the first time in hundreds of years, the Vampire King felt something tighten in his chest, something dangerously close to recognition. "That voice?" he murmured. And without knowing why, his gaze turned toward the kitchens. Toward the girl everyone else treated like nothing. The grand hall had never felt so small. When King Alaric turned toward the kitchens, silence followed his gaze like a shadow. Nobles who moments ago laughed loudly now held their breath. Guards stiffened. Servants froze mid-step. No one questioned the Vampire King when his attention settled on something, or someone. Alira felt it before she saw it. A weight pressed against the air, heavy and suffocating. The humming died on her lips. Slowly she looked up. And there he stood. Tall, unmoving, dressed in dark royal armor etched with ancient runes. His presence swallowed the room, his crimson eyes glowing like embers beneath moonlight. This was no monster from bedtime warnings. This was power given form. Her heart pounded violently. Instinct screamed at her to run. But her legs refused to move. "Who is she?" Alaric asked. His voice was calm, controlled, but it carried centuries of command. The head steward stumbled forward, bowing so low his forehead nearly struck the floor. "No one, your majesty. Just a street girl. We found her loitering." "Lying?" Alaric interrupted quietly. The word struck harder than a shout. The king's gaze never left Alira. He could hear it now, her heartbeat. Not fast with greed. Not sharp with fear. Steady. Gentle. Familiar in a way that unsettled him. "You were singing," he said, more statement than question. Alira swallowed. Her voice trembled, but she answered honestly. The boy was afraid. A murmur rippled through the hall. A homeless girl speaking directly to the Vampire King was unthinkable. The steward raised his hand to strike her for the disrespect. He never got the chance. The air cracked. In the blink of an eye, Alaric stood between them, his hand wrapped around the steward's wrist with terrifying restraint. Frost crept along the stone floor. Torches flickered violently. "Touch her," Alaric said softly, "and you will lose the hand you raised." The steward collapsed to his knees, sobbing apologies. Alira stared in disbelief. No one had ever stood between her and cruelty before. Alaric released the man and turned back to her. Up close his eyes were not cruel. They were tired. Lonely. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alira," she whispered. The sound of it echoed strangely in his mind, unlocking something buried deep beneath centuries of blood and darkness. He had heard that name once before, long ago, spoken in an ancient tongue by a dying oracle. The one whose voice calms the eternal hunger. "You should not be here," Alaric said quietly. "This place devours people like you." Alira lifted her chin, surprising even herself. "So does the street." Something unreadable flickered across his face. Instead of dismissing her, the Vampire King did something that shocked everyone present. He turned to the guards. "See that she is fed, warmed, and harmed by no one." The nobles erupted in whispers. The king had shown mercy. Worse, interest. As Alira was led away, she felt his gaze remain on her back. She did not know why her voice had mattered. She did not know why her chest ached with a strange sense of being seen. And Alaric stood alone in the grand hall, staring at the space she had occupied. For the first time in centuries, the hunger inside him was quiet. And for the first time in his immortal life, the Vampire King began to watch, not to hunt, but to protect. Alira did not sleep that night. She sat near the servant's fire, wrapped in borrowed cloth, staring into the flames as if they might explain what had happened. Food rested untouched beside her. Warmth surrounded her body, yet her hands still shook. The Vampire King had spoken to her, protected her, looked at her as if she mattered. By morning the whispers began. She bewitched him. She's a trickster. No human catches the king's eye without sin. Servants avoided her. Guards watched her too closely. Even kindness now came with fear attached. Alira realized quickly that attention from power was not always safety. It could be a sharper danger. Across the castle, Alaric felt the shift. He heard everything. The whispers slithered through stone and shadow, thick with resentment. Mortals had always feared him, but now they feared her. And that anger disturbed something ancient inside him. He watched Alira from a distance over the next days. Not hidden, never hidden, but never close enough to frighten her. He saw how she helped others quietly. How she gave half her food to the same servant boy. How she lowered her gaze when insulted instead of answering with bitterness. She did not know she was being tested. Not by cruelty, but by destiny. On the third evening the council gathered. Human nobles and vampire envoys stood together in uneasy tension. One voice rose louder than the rest. "This girl is a liability," a noble lord declared. "She distracts His Majesty. Humans like her bring weakness. If she stays, unrest will follow." Alira stood at the edge of the chamber, summoned but unarmed, heart pounding. She had learned what this meant. People like her were removed quietly. Alaric said nothing at first. Silence stretched. Dangerous. Heavy. Then he rose. "I ruled before your bloodlines learned how to write," he said calmly. "I have burned kingdoms for less arrogance than this." The room froze. He stepped forward until he stood beside Alira. She felt the cold of his presence but also something else, steadiness. Like standing beside a mountain that would not move. "You see weakness," Alaric continued. "I see restraint. You see poverty. I see dignity. You see a girl with nothing." His gaze hardened. "I see someone who gave comfort when no one else would." The noble swallowed hard. "She is human." "So was I," Alaric said softly. Gasps echoed. Alira turned to him, stunned. "For centuries," he went on, "I believed humanity was something I lost forever. And yet," his eyes dropped to her, unreadable and intense. "It stood before me and reminded me." No one spoke. "Anyone who harms her," Alaric finished, "harms me." That night Alira cried alone, not from fear but from confusion. She did not understand why a king of monsters would defend someone like her. She did not understand why her chest ached when he looked at her, as if he were seeing something she herself could not. And Alaric stood at the balcony, staring at the moon, knowing the truth at last. This was no coincidence. Her voice, her presence, her courage. The ancient prophecy had awakened. and the girl they tried to erase was standing at the center of his fate. Alira began to notice the change before anyone else did. When she spoke, shadows listened. Candles burned steadier when she hummed. The restless servant boy slept without nightmares if she sang beside him. Even the cold stone halls felt warmer in her presence, as if the castle itself recognized her. It frightened her. She had lived her entire life believing she was ordinary, less than ordinary. Now the world seemed to lean toward her and she didn't understand why. Alaric did. Ancient texts had begun whispering to him again. In the deepest vault of the night court, beneath layers of blood-sealed stone, the vampire king stood alone before a relic older than his reign. The Codex Nocturne had been silent for centuries. Yet now, its runes pulsed faintly, responding. The voice of balance shall rise from dust. Born human, unbound by blood. Able to quiet the hunger even kings cannot escape. Alaric closed his eyes. Every word pointed to her. But destiny never arrives without resistance. That night, the castle was breached, not by an army but by betrayal. A rogue vampire clan long thought extinct, slipped past the wards. Their goal was clear. Alira. They found her alone in the lower corridor, carrying blankets to the servants' quarters. The air turned sharp. Cold. Wrong. You don't know what you are, one of them hissed, eyes glowing with hunger. But we do. Fear rooted Alira to the floor. Before she could scream, the walls trembled. Alaric arrived like a storm. The clash was swift and merciless. Stone cracked. Shadow screamed. When it was over, the rogues lay unconscious at his feet, alive only because Alira cried out for mercy. Don't, she begged. Please. The king turned to her slowly, stunned. No one had ever stopped him mid-judgment. You would spare those who came to kill you? He asked. Alira nodded, shaking. If I become what they are, then what was the point of surviving? Something broke open inside him then. Later, in the quiet aftermath, Alaric finally told her the truth. You are not weak, he said gently. You never were. Your voice doesn't soothe, it binds. It reminds monsters what they once were. She stared at him, overwhelmed. I don't want power. He stepped closer but did not touch her. Power doesn't ask. It chooses. For a moment, their worlds balanced on a single breath. The distance between them felt unbearable. And Alaric realized the cruelest truth of all. Loving her might save his world. But it could also destroy him. The trial was called at dawn. For the first time in living memory, humans and vampires gathered not for war, but for judgment. The rogue clan knelt in chains. The nobles who had demanded Alira's removal stood pale and silent. And at the center of the grand hall stood Alira herself, no longer shaking, no longer hidden. Still human. Still humble. But no longer invisible. Alaric sat upon the obsidian throne, crown of the night court resting heavy upon his head. He had ruled through fear, through strength, through blood. But this decision would define his reign more than any battle. The girl is dangerous, one noble dared to say. Her existence disrupts the balance. Alaric rose slowly. No, he replied. She is the balance. He descended the steps and stood beside Alira, placing himself, deliberately, between her and the world. For centuries we believed power came from domination, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. Yet one unarmed human did what armies could not. She silenced the hunger. She chose mercy when offered vengeance. She reminded us of restraint. He turned to the nobles who had scorned her. You treated her like a servant. Like nothing. And yet, his eyes burned. She saved us all. The rogue vampires were exiled, stripped of blood rights. The nobles who abused their power were publicly disgraced. Justice, long denied, finally spoke. Then Alaric did the unthinkable. He knelt. Gasps shook the hall. Before Alira, the vampire king lowered himself, pressing his fist to his chest in the ancient vow of allegiance. I will not cage you, he said quietly. I will not crown you against your will. But I ask stay. Not as a symbol. Not as a queen. As yourself. Tears filled Alira's eyes. I'm afraid, she admitted. Alaric looked up at her, not as a king, not as a monster, but as a man who had waited centuries to feel alive. So am I, he said. But I would rather fear the future with you than rule eternity alone. Alira took his hand. And in that moment the night court felt warm for the first time. She did not become queen by blood or force, but by choice. And the world learned a lesson it would never forget.